sketch a line in a car. This to me is like almost the perfect series of lines that describe a curve at the same time. I love the lighting, I love the lines of this. So like that fold is almost like how you would fold the bonnet, and car designers get obsessed with these lines, you know. I love this. I think it's a lovely abstract banana, almost kind of futuristic banana, kind of Picasso-y in some kind of way. So there we go. We're starting to see lots of different kinds of bananas. Now remember, at the very start, the difference between English and Scottish, or Spanish and Chilean Spanish. So they're all the same. This is the same instruction, the same learning design. And we're already starting to see just slight variation. So how might we open the crack to that slight variation? And we see it naturally arise. So as a teacher, I don't have to do any of this. This is all social mechanisms, okay? Here's another banana. This is one, as you saw earlier, how do you get volume into the banana? It's actually quite difficult. I was actually going to bring lots of rolls of masking tape to get you to play with it, to actually try it, but it is actually quite a challenge. What will I say about this? As a designer, you take whatever shortcuts you can to best effect. This is a banana covered in masking tape. Okay? So I'm not going to say it's cheating, well, P in this case it was. This is efficient use of banana. So I'm going to suggest a banana is a berry, by the way. It's not a fruit. So, anyway, yeah, yeah. I'm sure. So, I go to the president of the fruit thing and he said, a berry. So here's another one. Another banana that's just been covered in masking tape. Another banana that's been covered in masking tape because they struggled with the volume thing. But at least this student then said, oh, maybe I haven't done enough work, so I'll add some leaves to it, okay? And you know, we don't function. You know, students might say, well, how am I to do this? We don't give them any advice on how to do it or why to do it. This is constructive. It's emergent behavior, if you like. And then this one, you know, this is definitely a, no, honestly, it's a banana. Like this, yep, same thing. So what you see in this is actually, this is more about the communication of the banana. So this has got nothing now to do with making banana with masking tape. This is how am I actually going to convince somebody that this is actually a banana. So this is a different thing. Now remember, go back to that collaboration and coordination. Remember, our students are on their own. So for me, to try and get them to recognize that there are actually other students is really hard. So when they're doing this, it tells me that they know there are other students. They know that they are broadcasting, okay, that they are talking. That's, again, is one of the most important designally things you can actually ever do, is take that idea and actually communicate it, okay? So this is right at the start of the course. We are already seeing what we find behaviours emerge from a natural social setting. This one, this was Banana Gun. This actually had a whole story attached to it, okay? Then this one, now this is taking framing, composition. This is somebody who is saying, how am I going to communicate this? So somebody, it's not sitting here, it's sitting there, it's quite specific. There's somebody playing with light, for example, quite extreme light. And then there's this one, this pack that we send out the pack with pencil, t-shirt and so on. And the inside of the box is with a nice kind of green background. So this student has created a face in this particular image. And you don't see it at first, and sometimes you do. Some people do, some people don't. But what it kind of allows is somebody to notice, because there's inside a studio 400 or 500 other bananas, okay? So you've got all of this data, all of these bananas all over the place, and just from this one banana, you might then see a bit of a conversation happen. In this case, it was the student's tutor saying, oh, did you realise that you made a smiley face? You actually made a face in that previous one, and the student hadn't realised it. So it's a way in to inviting a conversation with a student. And that dialogue, as Peter was talking about yesterday, that conversation with yourself or with others is really, really incredibly important. Okay, now it gets a bit weird, okay? So, we are not sure about this. We think it might be a pineapple banana, we're not sure. And this is my students in the first presentation of Year 101. Now, this tells me something else. Teachers in the audience, this tells me that this is working, okay? Nobody would go out in Scotland in the snow with a cup holder and some peppers and a masking tape banana unless they wanted to do it, okay? So they are really motivated, they are wanting something, okay? You should never walk past this. You can't then see this effort and go, yeah, well, that's great. you have to, as a teacher, you know, so it's almost drawing you in some ways. This level of engagement with the activity, you know that something's working, okay? Similarly, we see students actually using the banana itself. We've seen, in this case, I think it's a bio one. We've also seen where you scratch the surface and you let it go brown and so on. So there's lots of different ways you can actually kind of approach it. Of course, we do also get students who conflate, what shall we say, creativity or originality with exceptional divergence. So the random ones are like this. Banana with egg cup. This one is really interesting. It's a handle, so it's a way of holding the banana, because bananas, you know, need a handle. This is crab meat. Okay, apple, yeah, we get that quite a lot. And I'll quickly go past about that. So we get a whole bunch of students sort of almost expressing their identities, of a rebellion against the activity in some ways as well. I'd like to go back to this one just for a second though. This is the one where, if you remember, it's how do you create volume out of masking tape? And what you need to do is almost get as much air in there, if you like. So we start to see what we think of as threads of bananas. So one student will do a kind of scrunched up one. And then you'll see a student, oh, that's quite interesting, I could do this. And you start to see the technique. We start with this, everybody else gives it a try, with a bit more structure, with a bit more shape. And then it leads to these sorts of things. What is the kind of random structure that you can see from that? And then you start to see little popcorn ones appear. The berry, yes, absolutely, definitely. And then curls, for example, and then we've got one with a bit of a sort of structure to that, and then we have something like this, okay? Now, as I said, this is one activity out of about 15 that we have at the start. We expect students to do it really, really quickly and then just pass it off. This must have taken, I don't know, about 20 or 30 minutes, very carefully folding all of the masking tape, okay? So again, you know that somebody is engaged. You know that somebody's perhaps a little bit too engaged in this particular instance. But you know, that's something that you can't pass off. That's something as an educator or as a learner of design you can't ignore or walk past. If you remember this one, the old efficient use of berries, so this was a banana covered in masking tape. I just want to finish on this one. So then we get a whole bunch of these, a bunch of storytelling, and for me storytelling in design is really, really important. It's such a lovely way of getting into your head and kind of like communicating ideas. So we had this is one of the most popular posts we've ever had. This is about the boy who rode his banana dolphin around the world. Yeah, it's kind of like the life of Pi on a banana. Then we have this one, and then finally this. So I guess what I'm trying to say is we see quite a lot of rich variation. And on the one hand, you could look at this as a really, really simple thing. As just this trivial activity, but I kind of see a bit more in this, particularly for my students who some never actually meet face to face. Okay, so teaching them at a distance can be an incredible challenge. So having something like this really, 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 really simple, almost trivial activity, and making as much as you possibly can out of it, both as a student or as a teacher, that to me is kind of one of the hearts of both design and of education. Okay? So from that simple activity, we get all of this divergence complexity. And bear in mind, you know, this is 400 or 500 other bananas. And there are 50 or 60 exercises that you have to complete. So for example, this is just an example that students have to complete in the first TMA, in the first major assessment. So it's not just the trivial activities. The trivial activity is almost a way of, how should we put it, acculturalization, getting used to. It's how do you talk in a design studio? How do you get on with it? So it's, once we do the bananas, how are we going to share our, which means when we come to the more serious design activities, how might we apply precisely the same sort of principles, social learning, and so on and so forth, to much better effect as designers. Okay? So there we go. That's the kind of, this of it kind of gets a bit serious. I'm really sorry about this, the audience. This is where it gets a bit kind of hardcore. Because on the one hand, we kind of know that it works as teachers, okay? But on the other hand, it can also be really hard to just ask you as students, well, is it working, okay? Because you will tell me anything you think I want to hear. Similarly, I'll also only hear what it is that I want to hear. Okay, so it kind of works both ways. But what we need to do is to understand whether or how this stuff is actually working. Okay, so this is the second part. This is much more about how we prove. Proves maybe a bit of a strong word, but how we understand what is actually happening in these sorts of situations. So for me, the main pedagogy is this. The studio is a seriously important pedagogy, okay? I'm sure you'll all here, you'll just take it for granted, you know, that you work in a studio, you work in a shared environment. Your campus is one of the nicest studios I've ever seen so far. You can see your work dotted throughout the campus itself. That's a studio, okay? Being able to see other solutions and work with other students, that's a studio. And I think that the studio model could actually be propagated to other subjects as well. I'm not going to talk about the other two. I really want to focus on this one, the kind of the social and the peer relationship stuff, because that's what we are interested in the virtual studio. So this is the kind of question that we started. We just want to know what sort of engagement does actually take place, what kind of social interaction does happen. Because as I say, as teachers, we have this notion of what we think is happening. We have this dream of an ideal student. And in reality, most students are not like our ideal student. And similarly, they're not like our worst student either. In fact, the data that I'll show you later prove that most students are actually just normal people. You know, they're just trying to get on with a whole bunch of stuff. And I mean that as a genuine compliment, by the way, okay? And I'll show you why a wee bit later on. So, the presentation that we're looking at, don't worry too much about these numbers. This would be a typical snapshot of one of those courses, one of the U101 Design Thinking courses, one induction, if you like. So in this one, we had about 317 students that completed. We have a kind of rough male-female split. It's usually about half and half. This one was slightly off. We have quite a divergence of age. I mean, if you were to take a slice through the population of an Open University course, you would probably be taking a slice through the entire population of the UK. Probably a few more students with accessibility issues, probably slightly more students from ethnic backgrounds, slightly fewer students from very, very low, slightly more students from low economic backgrounds. So basically what I'm saying is, this is a very normal population of students who have never, ever designed in their life before. Okay, that's another, well, not necessarily never designed, there'll be a mix, shall we say, but they've never formally sat any design education. The Open University, as its title suggests, we are entirely open. Anybody is welcome to study at the Open University. We have no barrier to entry other than the fee. And for most students in the UK, if you're from a low economic background, then that fee is usually waived. Okay. In this particular studio, you know, there's lots of engagement. There's lots of data that is actually created from this. Again, don't worry about the numbers. It's the bottom bit that matters. You get 317 students in here creating tons and tons and tons of data, okay? That's them actually creating, from my position as a teacher, they're actually creating learning opportunities, okay? So it's far less about me teaching and much more about me almost trying to allow this sort of learning to take place and trying to find out where I can actually encourage these sorts of events of learning, okay? So we need to kind of understand, well, how is that actually working? So here's a way that we cut the data, for example. So on basically what we've divided, what we've done here is we have divided the student population into three, just according to final results, okay? So a distinction at the Open University is 85% plus, a fail is 40% minus, okay? So our distinction students are up here, fail students are in here, and most other students are in here. And you can see precisely what you might expect. This one, average number of views, this is just how many times do you go onto it? How many times do you look at other students' work? How engaged are you? So this is almost a kind of like a social media indicator in some ways, okay? The next one is simply to do with completion of the work. You have certain slots, certain of those little squares that you actually complete as you go through the module. And this is an indicator of, you know, how far on you are with it. Commenting is much more about with the slots. And as you can see, there are far fewer comments than there are views. Again, hopefully you might just expect that as a normal behavior. And then we'll come to what this one actually means a little bit later. I'm hoping that it's kind of obvious that the more views, you know, the more engaged you are with this, the more likely you are to get a distinction. Similarly, the less engaged you are, see,
is the outcome determined by the
not just, no. Oh, sorry.
by the instructor or by the social core of everyone? Who's rating the work?
It's the student's own tutor. They do a certain part, usually about 50%. And then the second part is the module team. So that's the central academics. There's a bit of an exam that we go through. And what we do is we put in place a sort of marking regime to mark the final portfolio. Then we will take random samples and do various checks. So just now, you're absolutely right. It's a good point. It'd be lovely to talk about it later, actually. Just now, there is no social metrics. We're ready for it, and we allow badging, for example, but we haven't quite enabled it yet. So just now, there's no peer-to-peer measurements or any kind of social metrics yet. That can be challenging and interesting in so many different ways. So yeah. And also, I suppose the other thing to note about the actual evaluation itself, it's not just the evaluation of the work in the studio. There's a whole bunch of other stuff that students have to do round about that. So you're not just looking at that. The studio is one aspect of student attainment, okay? So, but if you look at these numbers, this is only 28 students, okay? This is 276 students, and this is 13. So when you're actually looking at this data, it's actually pretty useless in so many ways. As I said earlier, most of our students are from a normal population, and they're sitting in here. And we're wanting a lot of these to get up into here, and we want to try and avoid as many of these. But cutting the data like this doesn't really tell us very much. So the next step will be to cut it into finer grains, if you like. So again, what we do here is we have 4 quarters. This is the lowest performing quarter of the total group, and this is the highest performing quarter of the group. I don't know if you can see, but there's an interesting S-curve starting to appear. So if you remember, these were the normal students. They're sitting in here. And if we hadn't cut the data like this, and then the next cut that we'll do, you wouldn't start to see these other patterns starting to emerge. But we have far more students who are closer to fail than we have closer to distinction, as measured by the behaviour in this studio, okay? And that's measured and that's carried through in the other sort of metrics of the data. Because we're at the Open University and because it's online, we can actually cut this data even finer than this. So this is what we were actually able to do finally. This is called a Pearson correlation. Sorry. I know it's a bit of an extreme from bananas to first moment coefficient linear order. But again, basically what this is telling us, kind of almost unequivocally in some ways, is that there really is a relationship between what you do in this studio and the result that you achieve, okay? So, for example, the number of empty slots. If you do the work, you're going to pass. If you don't do the work, you're not going to pass. It's kind of a no-brainer. But it means that we actually can see how that no-brainer pans out, if you like, over the course of a module. And we can actually look at this as a metric, something that can actually be useful for a tutor. Similarly, the number of views. This is quite extreme. If you see these outliers, some students are engaging in thousands and thousands of views. In actual fact, some students engage in way too much activity. They actually get sucked into Open Studio as a form of social media. And that can have a negative consequence as well. It means that we're not doing other stuff. But then, not going to complain as well. But that correlation is actually very strong. And similarly, and finally, this correlation here, this is on the number of comments. So how engaged, how much do you actually do? Again, another strong correlation. But for me, this is the big one. This is the one, I'll show you in just here. Remember that S-curve. This is about how do we transfer students from this to this, okay? So all of this data, it tells you nothing about student behaviour, okay? That's where you as a human being have to understand what these numbers are actually doing. I'll come on to that in just a second. And I'll show you why. This is the last correlation. Oh, sorry, my apologies. Is anybody actually interested in sort of graphs and stuff? If so, I feel the link to the paper is there and all the numbers and stuff that people like with that is there. This for me is the big one, okay? So what you're saying here is a correlation between just looking and then actually commenting, okay? This is the huge difference because we want that transformation to happen, that you're not just passively looking at other work, but you're actually then getting engaged in that work, okay? There's nothing wrong with looking. In fact, looking is isn't. We'll have a look at it in just a second. But this tells me, I know it sounds really, really simple, but this is a really important result. Remember, we're at a distance. This is a virtual online tool. We think it works because we see some good effect to students, but this tells me it genuinely does work, okay? And that's as much a part to do with the learning design as it does, because when we measure this on other courses, there isn't quite such a correlation. So bananas matter, okay? Not the technology, it's the bananas. Similarly, it's not the numbers. It's actually what this point represents, okay? That's the thing that is the only person I could find from it's the only one I could find about with. So again, as a teacher, it's not enough to just look at the numbers and say, well, the numbers say it's okay. You've got to understand what those numbers actually mean. So that correlation between sort of looking and then doing something, what does it actually mean? And that's the kind of second part that we're working on just now. So we've got a couple of theories. And again, it goes back to what we think we are teaching you, if that makes sense, of what you're actually learning. And those two things are not the same. I'm not going to say they're not quite the same. I don't know what you're at from the courses that become individual designers, your own thinkers, okay? And I can't predict that. But what I do need to do is make sure that I'm not, killing you in the process or destroying you emotionally or, causing harm. I would like to think that we could give you the right sorts of opportunities, as Donald Schoen would say of the quiz. That's quite important. So between what we design and what you actually think of what you think is actually happening, that's what we're actually measuring now, or what we're trying to get down to in this studio. And this is where we get down to a thing called qualitative sort of analysis and looking at things. So for example, one of the things we have identified is this. And again, I know it sounds really obvious, but if you put time into what you do, and it's not just a better result in education, it's a better design result. And anyone that comes with design practice will say the same thing. You've got to put the time in. You've got to sit in front of the sketchbook and keep doing, keep working. Okay? So again, what we're trying to do is try to get some idea of how that's working quantitatively, how much time is a student spending, and then follow it up qualitatively so that we can actually say something about those two things, okay? Because that's quite important. I'm not going into too much detail on all of these factors that we've seen. There's a lot more in the paper, and I know it's quite warm in here, and I don't intend to talk for very much longer either. It would be more interesting to have some chat about this, okay? The second one, I mentioned that it was really good to get students to go from looking to commenting. Well, we've found that listening in, what we call, or we used to, doesn't contribute really. It's turning out this is actually really important in normal studios as well. And that just sitting there, being present, listening, or even half listening sometimes, is actually more important than not being there, believe it or not. And you can actually learn a hell of a lot by just mimicking social behaviour. I'll go back to the banana thing. Without much effort on your part, you can actually learn a hell of a lot. The next one is to do with quick and easy engagement. I've got a real thing about this, particularly in software design and even HCI. Anytime you have to think, how do I do this in an interface, the interface has failed as far as I'm concerned. It should be as frictionless as it possibly can, okay? We're lucky because Open Studio is surrounded by things like Pinterest, YouTube, social media. So that social media, we should not redesign it. We should use that same pattern, because if there's anything that gets in the way of what you think and what you want to do with that thought, then it's not working for you. You should really try and do something about it. But what we know is that if it is difficult, the students immediately disengage. And that's particularly true in a distance environment. I'm not so sure what it's like in an approximate environment, but we lose a lot of students because they see their difficulties. So it's our responsibility to make sure that they don't even ever get to those difficulties, and that's a really big challenge. But an interesting one. The comment to conversation, this is the conversion of them just looking at something and then moving into that comment. And we've got some idea of how we can actually do that. So for example, there are certain individuals who really encourage that in other students, who maybe comment on a post and then in return a student comments back and then something starts to snowball. So again, that feeds back into us as teachers to say, well, can we do something with that? And there's a couple of other mechanisms as well that we're starting to see. This other one, social networks. This is a difficult one. I don't know what we're going to do with this. But like Facebook or Twitter or any other social media, what we see is huge reinforcing networks. We get clusters of people, and it's really then hard for other people to get into those kind of groups or cliques or groupings, okay? That's absolutely fine if you've got a family, whatever it might be, but in an educational environment, it's usually the students that get there first, start to like stake the ground first. It kind of also happens in a real studio as well, you know, in a physical space. So we're not sure how we might disrupt this. We've got a few ideas and we'll try them out and we'll see. Again, I'll go back to the kind of design is teaching and teaching is design. Just what I said there, we've got a few ideas, we'll try something and then see if it works, okay? You know, that's it, that's design. You can all go home. It's as simple as that. It's the same with teaching, but very often we stop at that, we'll see if it works, and then make the next difference. We tend to stick with habits. Anyway, I'll diverge into that one. Final one is that we see a spectrum of engagement. Not everybody has to do what we think the ideal student should do. If you remember that kind of S-curve, I'd be quite happy if I could just prevent a lot of those students not failing. Because maybe they don't want to be designers. They might actually want to just apply some of the tools to, say, policy design or to geography or to another subject. I don't know. You know, half of my students, I don't know what it is they actually want to do with their design, okay? With the knowledge that they're getting, or hopefully getting. So again, allowing for a spectrum of engagement, allowing for different behaviours is actually quite important. Again, as a teacher, we are used to just, you know, sitting in regimented rows and we expect everybody to adopt the same behaviour. But that's not how people actually learn. It's not how they actually go about these sorts of things in reality. So there we go. That's the sort of data that we are sort of looking at just now. Again, I go back to the sort of slight difference to the big picture to the little picture, okay? It's important to look at the big picture, but you really, really need to look at the little picture as well. And I say that matters in design, and I think it matters in education as well, because that's when you get the best bananas. Thank you very much.
Tenemos tiempo para preguntas. Adelante. Alejandra.
How is the structure of the course in terms of month? You are talking about semesters in some.
Yes, mostly semesters. Yeah, there'll be about 7 or 8 months, 6 or 7 months for one presentation. Yeah. So I'm very conscious that I didn't go into a lot of detail about what the course was actually doing. So if anybody wants a bit more information on that, just let us know. We can get some of the other stuff that Peter and I have done on the course itself. Yeah, have I missed something? Have I missed out a bit? Because it's actually quite important how this sits in context. Because the only thing that we do, there's a whole bunch of other stuff that really matters. You know, that make a banana out of masking tape is a kind of clue about how the rest of the course behaves. It's a clue in terms of tone, in terms of attitude, and how we kind of go about things. But the other stuff does matter as well, all the other technical and all the other basic stuff. So my apologies if there's big gaps there, but I can certainly send some stuff.
And you are progressing in the kind of projects. This is a trigger.
Yeah, basically, yes. I mean, the first project was that sort of quantitative study that we did, wherever it was. Yeah, looking at all the numbers. And the second one is now we're going to be looking at the actual sort of qualitative stuff and trying to put those sort of two things together to kind of make sense of it in some ways. So yeah, it's an ongoing process, and in some ways, design and education and research should be an ongoing iterative process in so many ways.
Is this class like inserted in a bigger program, like, or anybody can take the class from different careers?
Yep, anybody can take it at all. We do have a kind of sort of loose umbrella program, so you get a qualification, design and innovation qualification. You get it in environmental studies, engineering, business, and arts. So there's kind of flavours, if you like, of design. But it's very much, as Peter was talking about yesterday, it's very much a generic. This is design thinking. This is not about product design. It's definitely not about architecture or interior design. It's about the process of design thinking, how you can apply that in any knowledge situation. See, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Did you guys create your own social media? Like the software you use in Studio, did you guys create that?
Yes, we did. We developed that in-house. That's version 2. We actually had a first iteration of it, and it came from a digital photography course. So yes, we actually do quite a lot of development in-house. This studio, I'd be lying if I said you could get it completely open and free. But what we tend to do is anytime we develop, because we use Moodle underneath, and there's a virtual learning platform, any tool that we develop, we release to the community so anybody can theoretically use it.
Because I work at a school, so
Okay.
we're making maker spaces right now.
Okay.
So I'm really good at
Okay. Yeah. Sadly, it would be a bit harder to implement. It's not a standalone tool. I think that's the disappointment. I think if we were to do this again, we would really think about how much wider could we actually have made this. We thought that this might be quite wide, but then you've picked a platform, I feel like, and as soon as you pick a platform, yeah. So yeah, it'd be nice to make it open. But then the other thing is, we went to Santiago College yesterday and Veteran School the day before, or the day before that. They are finding, online tools and solutions to do exactly the same thing. Whether it is just Pinterest or whether it's even just Twitter with a hashtag or whatever it is. Again, it's the banana that matters, not the technology. So if you think about the banana first and then work out what it is, how you're going to make that frictionless as easy as possible, then there are other technologies that you can kind of use and leverage. Yeah.
Are the students aware of the study?
Yes, yeah, kind of. I'm not going to say explicitly aware. They know that we constantly study, if that makes sense. We actually are always looking not only for feedback from what they do, but also feedback from them. So we are actually we're engaged. We actually really speak to our students and say, look, tell us about the course. What did you think of it? How can we make it better? Because it's a design thinking course, we don't just expect them to say, yeah, this was a bit rubbish. We expect them to say, this is what you could do about it, or this is better, or I found this thing, why don't we try this? So we take a much more kind of proactive. It's hard to do with 500 students because 500 suggestions for changes quite hard to manage, but it's actually quite.
And kind of like related to this question, have you ever considered using this method like in other countries or other universities? Like
Yes, we have. Yes, absolutely. That's why we're here. Yeah, absolutely. And what would be really interesting would be to say, well, not how do you do that, but what might, kind of almost use the what might question. How might it express itself in Chile? Because one of the worst things you could potentially do is say that here's the tools, off you go, you could be like us, you do it. It'd be much nicer to say, well, how can this similar thing from a really simple fact, thank you very much, because what I'll do is I'll end on this slide. Peter introduced this yesterday, India report, a year in the making. The Indian government love big documents. This is a slim volume. The way that they suggest how this could go about is by giving 3 design project examples, okay? How to make a post office, for example, which involves logistics, physical products, system services. So this is about you being able to do something really complex by just doing something really simple. So it's like make a banana, and from that arises all this emergent behaviour. So that would be the beautiful thing, would be what little things might, or what things are already being done, from all the stuff we've done, how might that propagate into something that's much, much larger and grow naturally or organically. So, yeah, so are you up for it then?
Yeah.
Yeah, brilliant. Excellent. Yes. Yeah.
I have a question about the relationship between creativity and critical thinking.
Okay.
Because I'm trying to work it out in my own mind.
Okay.
My theory is that both are really important to innovation.
Yes.
Right? You need lots of freedom to explore and get outside the box and imagine. But you also need some structure to critique.
Yes.
So I'm curious about what you think about that idea, and then how it shows up in the design studio space.
Okay, I'll maybe do the second one first, because it's a very complex question in some ways. But again, it's kind of, it's kind of complex, but it still needs, you know, a really, really simple way of like, this is how to, or let's start going about it. If I just flick back to this a wee second, I don't know if you can see here, if you turn that around through 180 degrees, it actually spells Lola. So the way that we introduce it to students is through a story, if you like, almost a metaphor. I'm really tempted to push this question to you because it was, he did it, not me. So we give these two people, there's Lola and there's Sam. Lola is the creative individual and Sam is the more critical